Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt at Studio North today, joined by Ambassador Kevin Rudd. Mr. Rudd was formerly the Prime Minister of Australia. He is now Australia's ambassador to the United States. Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning, Hugh. It's wonderful to be able to speak with you again today.
Thank you. I want to begin with a column I have over at Fox News. I write for both the Post and Fox News, but today it's at Fox News. But it borrows from my colleague Josh Rogan at the Post. He interviewed Admiral Samuel Paparo earlier in the week in Singapore, and Admiral Paparo told Josh, and I quote, "I want to turn the Taiwan Strait into an unmanned hellscape using a number of classified capability so that I can make the People Liberation Army Navy's lives utterly miserable for a month, which buys me the time for the rest of everything. Classified capabilities means we don't know what it is, but," Paparo added, "it's real and it's deliverable." Do you think Australia would participate in that hellscape, Mr. Ambassador?
Well, firstly, I know Admiral Paparo quite well. In fact, last week I was in Hawaii and meeting with him and others at Indo-Pacific Command. And so I have a high regard for his professional skills and for his leadership. Secondly, what Admiral Paparo is talking about occurs within the framework of deterrence. That is, what deterrent actions can the United States and its allies and partners undertake in order to cause Xi Jinping and the Chinese leadership to conclude that the cost of launching any territorial invasion of Taiwan is simply far too high. And therefore, what is required on that on the part of our military leaders is to be able and to have the capability of deploying sufficient force at sufficiently short notice to cause the Chinese People's Liberation Army to conclude that this is too dangerous an undertaking to embark upon. Your specific question goes to the role of allies. The posture of all American allies, like that of the United States government itself, is not to commit to a particular public course of action in a hypothetical environment. And the reason we do that is because at the political level, we maintain a posture of what is called strategic ambiguity. There's a reason for that, Hugh, if I could elaborate very quickly. The reason for strategic ambiguity is to say to the Chinese, on the one hand, that you cannot reach a conclusion, if you're the People's Liberation Army, that the United States and its allies and the Taiwanese would not fight. That would be completely implausible on your part. At the same time, we don't wish to provide a blank check to the Taiwanese authorities to do what they want in terms of Taiwanese domestic politics and any unilateral declaration of independence by Taiwan, which would of itself cause Taiwan to cross Chinese long-standing red lines in order to bring about a real conflict in the first place. So therefore, I have respect for Admiral Paparo. I understand the doctrine of deterrence, a doctrine in which all of us have a responsibility across the Asia-Pacific. But the bottom line is, as responsible governments, we don't comment on a particular form of action under a particular future hypothetical scenario.
So let me try and drill down on that a little bit, Mr. Ambassador. You and I are the same age. You got out of college when I got out of college. My roommate, Dan Poneman, went off to Oxford. I went to a different sort of Oxford. I went to the Elba of America, San Clemente, and worked for Richard Nixon for 2 years as a ghostwriter. So I know all about strategic ambiguity from the man who conceived it, along with Dr. Kissinger in 1972. Different world. Strategic ambiguity meant a very different thing in 1972. The question on the table, and I think Admiral Paparo is pushing hard, it's time to strengthen the strategic ambiguity specifics so that Xi Jinping, and you know more about Xi than probably any world leader, because you speak Mandarin, you read Mandarin, I'm very aware of that. How do we persuade him not to do this? And the question is, do we have to get a little bit more explicit, as Admiral Paparo did by saying, here's what happens if we go in. I'm not saying we're going in, but here's what happens. We'll sink everything. Should we say things like that?
As I said, there's a different role to be played by political leaders on the one hand and military commanders on the other in terms of what is said and done in the current environment. Your core question here goes to what works in terms of deterrence in Xi Jinping's mind.
Yes.
And therefore, let's ask ourselves the question of what is his posture in terms of strategic decision-making so far. What we know about Xi Jinping in his first 10 years in office is that he does take risks, but he is a calculated risk taker. He's not a reckless risk taker. Now, you're a student of international relations. If we look back at Mao's period, for example, in the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, Mao's decision unilaterally to send millions of Chinese so-called volunteers across the Yalu in 1950, barely 3 months after the establishment of the People's Republic of China, against the United States, when the United States was a nuclear power and China was not back then. That's what we call reckless risk-taking. Anything could have happened. And if you go and reflect upon what Eisenhower was thinking of doing to the Chinese at the time, this was in fact a very big gamble. Xi Jinping is not in that category. He's a calculated risk taker. But if he calculates weakness on the part of the military capabilities and or the political will of his would-be opponents and or adversaries over Taiwan, then deterrence fails. It's what I call, this is a Kevin Rudd doctrine, Hugh, SMTX. You might say, what the hell is that?
SMTX.
It's a shading mirror test of Xi, which is he wakes up in the morning in Zhongnanhai, the center of the Chinese leadership in Beijing, China's equivalent of the Kremlin. He's having a morning shave. He's looking in that mirror and he's asking himself the question, could I get away with it today? And the job of Admiral Paparo, the job of allied military commanders, the job of the Taiwanese, is each morning to cause the military calculus in Xi Jinping's mind to be too risky. If he rolls the dice, Hugh, and fails, it's over for Xi Jinping and potentially over for the Chinese Communist regime. That's why understanding Xi Jinping as a calculated risk taker and constantly upping the level of cost associated with any unilateral military action is the correct way to maintain the status quo, which is what most allied governments and the United States itself and the Taiwanese are seeking to do.
Ambassador Rudd, I have on later today Chen Han Wang, the author of A Party of One, the first really good bio of Xi that I've read. And I'm going to talk to him about this Mao modeling that Xi seems to be following. The strategic gamble of 1950 achieved strategic surprise against the United States and the UN forces that were in Korea, MacArthur marching. They were on Wake Island. Truman and MacArthur were on Wake Island when a million Chinese come over the Yalu, and MacArthur told Truman, oh, they'd never come in. And so I'm afraid of strategic surprise, and the less we allow that to creep in. So I got an email from an active duty Marine officer last night, United States Marine Corps officer last night, who said what the Chinese are doing is desensitizing the West to their encroachments on that red line in the way that Hamas desensitized Israel to their pretend attacks on the Gaza fence, and that we are not responding with enough vocal and specific responses to the almost monthly, I guess Taiwan was encircled last month. What do you make of that? That maybe they're going to do strategic surprise on us. We're just not ready.
At present, I think if we look carefully at what the People's Liberation Army and Navy are doing, it falls into 2 or 3 categories. We need to be careful in our analysis of this. The first is, as we already discussed here, which is preparation for a full-scale military invasion. The Chinese PLA have been engaged in those preparations for a very long time. Their capabilities have continued to improve. A massive amphibious assault, but bear this in mind, Hugh, this would be infinitely more complex an operation than the D-Day landings back in 1944, whose 80th anniversary we celebrated and honored only last week. This is a huge stretch of water. The second scenario, which we are engaged in thinking about, is the possible blockade of the island. And that is to effectively cause there to be a cessation of supply of all the external goods and resources that Taiwan's economy needs to function, but also potentially of Taiwanese exports, including semiconductor chips, where Taiwan provides the highest quality chips for the world. The third scenario, which I think your Marine colleague has spoken about, is what we call in the business gray zone activity. And that is a series of actions short of war, short of invasion, but with the political objective of causing the Taiwanese administration and people, more importantly, to conclude that their situation over time has become hopeless. That involves rolling activities by the Chinese Coast Guard, for example, in Taiwan's offshore islands of Jinmen and Mazu. It involves, for example, repeated crossings of the median line, which has happened since 2022 by the Chinese PLA Air Force, many sorties virtually each day. It involves the sailing of Chinese vessels in and around what is called the contiguous line, that is 24 miles off the Taiwanese coast. It involves rolling cyber attacks against Taiwan. It involves a whole range of diplomatic measures in terms of shrinking Taiwan's international political space as well. I made a speech on this last week in Honolulu at the Asia Pacific Center for the Security Studies on this very subject, which is the international community, the United States, its allies, and the Taiwanese now need to be very clear-sighted about how each of these actions in the gray zone by the PLA needs to be deterred rather than simply waved through, because they can accumulate. And to go to the logic of what your Marine colleague has also indicated, they could flip very quickly from an accelerated and intense set of exercises into real military action. That's why deterrence of the grey zone is equally important as deterrence writ large against a full-scale military action, invasion, or a blockade.
What would serve Australia's needs best as our ally to assist the United States in establishing and maintaining deterrence or even strengthening deterrence against that action that we have not yet provided to Australia that America ought to up? We've got the AUKUS program. I don't think it's fully funded. I don't think we're doing what we're supposed to do. I'll let you talk about that as well. But what else might we do? What other cyber capabilities might we do? We have Five Eyes, and for the Steelers fans out there, that's the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and the United Kingdom sharing intel. But what more can we do for Australia that we aren't doing now, that we talk about doing, but we've got to put the pedal down? If you had a wish list from the United States, Mr. Ambassador, what should we do for Australia?
Well, just prior to the break, Hugh, you mentioned AUKUS. And for those of your listeners not familiar with the acronym, it stands for Australia, UK, US. What is it? It's two things. And this is critical in terms of what the United States, both Republicans and Democrats, have been doing in partnership with Australia over the course of the last couple of years. It enables Australia to purchase initially and then build its own nuclear-powered submarines, attack-class submarines. As you know, as someone who specializes in military and international affairs as well, Hugh, these are formidable assets. And the extent to which the Chinese media has publicly attacked the AUKUS deal on submarines, to me always suggests a pretty good barometer of how effective a piece of kit and equipment they are. Thereby, by adding this capability in Australia, and for HMAS Sterling, which is our naval base just south of Perth in Western Australia, facing the Indian Ocean, and by having a new large-scale boat-building capability at Osborne, just near Adelaide in South Australia, what you therefore have is a whole new set of capabilities in the aggregate deterrence equation. And what our Chinese friends look at in terms of aggregate deterrence is not just what the US is doing, it's what the allies are doing as well. So that is a critical part of the equation. Remember, we're not talking about just one or two boats. We're talking about a fleet of 8 boats over time and possibly growing larger. And this therefore becomes a formidable additional asset in the overall strategic equilibrium of the Indo-Pacific region. The second thing, Hugh, is it's another part of what Republicans and Democrats have done with their Australian partners, is initiate a new and unprecedented era of collaboration in advanced defense technologies, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, electronic warfare, unmanned undersea vehicles, unmanned aerial vehicles, and a whole range of other categories of super advanced defense technologies. Now, in the past, our 3 countries have had massive restrictions against, shall we say, trade and investment in and with each other's defense science and technology industries. The whole purpose of what's called the AUKUS Pillar 2, or Advanced Technologies Regime, is to remove those regulatory and legislative impediments and bans. In other words, it creates virtually a free trade agreement between the US, Australia, and the UK in this area of advanced defence science and technology categories. Why is that critical? It's because in the past, the truth is, when a new innovation has occurred in the laboratory somewhere about a new defence technology which can be deployed, on average it's taken us as allies about 12 years to get that from the laboratory into the hands of the warfighter. Our friends in China do that in 2 years. Therefore, what we need is an entirely new streamlined system which enables the free flow of defence science and technology, ideas, innovation, technology, and capital to enable our combined capabilities to keep pace and to, in fact, stay ahead.
Mr. Ambassador, that's all. I hope our teams can work together to get you on for a full hour, because I could just do this forever with you. I appreciate your time this morning, and I appreciate Australia's alliance. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hugh, and all the best to your listeners.